Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We're back at the backyard barbecue question and answer session here, courtesy of AMA and our sponsors, Taste Alberta, and all the beautiful producers. And I'm calling them beautiful because it's all we can say always. It's beautiful, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. But this week in particular, we've got a few curveballs thrown at us on the online forum. Keep up. We're going to cover three main topics. The first question was thrown at us, and it might sound an interesting and a simple one to address, is how do you do direct versus indirect? What's the difference? What do you do direct? How do you do indirect? And that's a pretty hefty topic we need to get through. We're going to demonstrate it. We're going to talk you through the concepts. But before we do that, we had questions about cookers or barbecues, or where we come from, we call it braais. What should you buy? Which one should you use? Should you use gas? Should you use pellet? Should you use this? We're going to talk you a little bit through the options and the kind of things that's important to you when you decide what cooker to buy or where you want to spend your money and what you want to cook. And then thirdly, this is an interesting one. We've got a question about searing, about black and blue. How do you sear tuna, sear fillet? And we're going to prop it up a little notch there. We're going to do some class where we're going to sear some pork tenderloin with a mushroom and white wine white sauce reduction. But without further ado, let's kick this thing off. And the whole point, you probably get that. The whole point of this thing is cook more local in your backyard with the produce your producers produce for you in Alberta. Right, so without further ado, we're going to kick off with the very first question this week that people threw at us. It's a bit of a complicated one, this one. It's the question is, which cooker should I buy? What should I use to do my backyard grilling on? Should I use charcoal? Should I use an offset smoker? Should I use a grill? To be honest with you, I'm going to get my board down because this is a hefty topic. Because your choices is everything from thousands of tens of thousands of dollars of equipment you can buy right down to the good old 20, 30, 40 buck cooker key that you can use to cook your food back on the barbecue in the backyard. There's really just a few topics you need to keep in mind when you want to make these decisions. The one is obviously budget, how much you want to spend. How much are you going to cook direct versus indirect? And that's a question we're going to cover later on. And the third thing you need to think about is what kind of a fuel will I have access to or I'll be comfortable cooking with, because each one of them has advantages and disadvantages. Let me explain. When we talk about the types of cookers, direct versus indirect, here's an example. This is what most people nowadays are investing their money into, which is a pellet cooker, pellet smoker. So the bottom line really about the pellet cookers is that you have a very fancy electronic control module. Your fuel that you're going to use is the pellets itself, which are compressed sawdust, and that allows you all kinds of options, which these cookers are typically able to do is give you low and slow temperatures, because the control board does that for you, or you can crank it up and you can do some searing and direct cooking with these units as well, but they are expensive. Then you can go to the old classic, the good old, let me introduce you to our good old lady. Oh, did I say old? It's not really old, but that's the way it's always been done, the low and slow cooks. This is the classic kind of low and slow setup you have, which is an offset cooker. You have the firebox separate from the actual cooking chamber. You make your fire in here. Your fuel is typically charcoal or chunks of wood, and it pulls through the hot air. This is all about indirect, low and slow cooking, the classic way of how barbecue used to be done. Now, some people say we want everything, so let me give you everything. You're looking for something that can give you both low and slow indirect versus direct heat, and a typical grill like this will do the job just fine. And it doesn't have to be a big fancy one like this. Any little grill can do that. Here's an example of a very inexpensive unit where you have the ability to make a fire in here and you can cook your food directly right onto the fire. And if it's too hot, you want to slow it down a little, you can use something bigger where the fire's on the one side and you use the other side for indirect cooking. The point is, you need to figure out for yourself budget, how much you want to spend, tens of thousands, almost tens of thousands, or just a few tens of bucks for your backyard barbecue. And you need to figure out what fuel you'd like to use, and you need to know how you want to cook it, direct or indirect, and that's going to determine your choices. It also depends on the skill you have when you barbecue. if you have no skill whatsoever, if you never cook in the backyard and you want to ask me which one should you buy, I'm saying buy the most expensive one there, because it will do the whole job for you. You just press the button, dial it in on the app on the phone, put your meat on, and you got yourself a barbecue. Or if you really want to go for it, buy cheap and simple and easy and set yourself a bit of a challenge. I bet you it's going to be harder getting a piece of brisket on this jobby than to do it on that one. And we're back. The second question this week that folks have been throwing at us is, what's the difference between direct cooking and indirect cooking? And we love that question because there's a huge discussion in the world, realizing that it's not just about throwing things on fire and you get it cooked. There's an art to doing the cooking. So very simply put, let me explain. Direct cooking is when you sear something right above the fire. Now what you'll see we've done here is we've got a really hot coal bed. We've put our burger patty right on top of the fire, and you need to be a little bit awake because you can see there's going to be flare-ups. But the idea is that you seal in the burger and all the good juices. So when you do steaks, for example, this is when you're going to do black and blue, quickly get it on both sides. If you're cooking a ribeye steak, this is when you want to render the fat pretty quickly from your steak. And in the case of bacon, obviously, you want to be able to make it crispy. For that, you need a hot fire. But then there's the art. Forgive me, I get lyrical about this one. Indirect cooking. That's when you apply heat that is lower for a longer period of time. That creates all kinds of magic with the foods that we work with. It relaxes the proteins, it gelatifies some of the connective tissues, it sets the bastings. There's so much you can do with indirect cooking. So the opportunity really is, make a fire on the one side, do your direct cooking right above the fire, or set your grill up or your cooker so you can do some indirect cooking, which is low and slow over a longer period of time. And here's a very important tip or trick. If you still don't follow what I'm saying here, is when you do low and slow or indirect cooking, temperatures for that unit is usually running between 230 to 280 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're searing, you can push it as high as 600 degrees Fahrenheit to be able to get that caramelization on a steak, for example. I am warming myself up to get going with ribs. So we've had a lot of questions about ribs this week on the forum. Questions about what's a 3-2-1 method. Do I do 3 hours and then 2 hours this and then that? But the bottom line is there's two ways how you can cook a rib. And we're talking about good old Alberta pork ribs that we're going to cook, in this particular instance, indirect on our grill. Here's the simple thing about ribs. Where most meats take some effort to prep before you cook them, the whole trick with ribs is the process of cooking them is where you're going to get the most value, and that's where the most work is involved as well. And it's another very good example this week about cooking it indirect, low and slow, versus direct. Today we're going to show you the barbecue method, the 3-2-1. We're going to put it on the fire. I'm putting it on the fire. Indirect heat, bone side down. We've already put all our spices on it. This is going to go until, you can see, not because hours of time or temperature, this is going to go until I can see some of the bones poking out and the meat started to tighten up because it's squeezing out the moisture. That's the first stage. That's 3, what they call in the barbecue competitions. The next step we're going to do is wrap the rib with some foil and moisture so that we can steam in and slowly gelatinize all the connective tissue. The third step is we'll open it up again, we will baste it so that we can build a nice glaze on our rib. And that, I think, is the perfect way to cook ribs. So stay tuned for this one. Okay, it's almost 3 hours. But it doesn't really matter how many hours you use when you make ribs. Remember that 3-2-1 conversation we've been having? What we're looking for is for the muscles to tighten up, for the proteins to really tighten up, get a nice bark set up. And then the next stage in this whole cook is being able to introduce some moisture, wrap the rib so we can get it nice and tender. And what we're doing here as cowboys is, before I do that, I need to lubricate it. We're using some apple cider vinegar. We put that down. And just because we can't get enough apple ever, we put a little bit of apple juice with it, and that introduces some moisture, into our ribs, which we slowly gonna, and if you want to use the real right terms for this jobby, is we're gonna braise the rib now. Still low and slow, still indirect heat, but with the moisture, it will slowly steam and get tender before we, looks like I'm leaking a little, before we baste it and create that beautiful glaze that you usually see when they post pictures about ribs. This time we're putting it meat down, indirect on our grill. Ta-da! Simple as that. Back to beer time. We're now on the home stretch of cooking Alberta pork ribs. Here's the idea. So what we're gonna do, you can see how the cowboy's already fiddled with it, but we are now showing you, this is how a well-cooked rib looks. I want to give you an idea. You see how it pulls from the bone? It's nice and soft, succulent, juicy. It's time to glaze it. Now, the way you glaze it is we're gonna put it back on the cooker. It doesn't look as pretty as it should be, okay? That's why we managed to get ourselves, and you might think a cowboy's a little crazy. Yes, we are. This is brown sugar, chili, red wine, glaze. How's that? Okay, be creative. That's why you're doing the backyard barbecue thingy. With the indirect heat, that glaze is gonna set. We're probably gonna glaze about 2 or 3 times, and then we're gonna eat some beautiful ribs. We're on the last one, the best stage of cooking a rib, and this, I mean, it's really the moment of truth when you want to know if your rib is good. Look at that. See, it's not falling off the bone, but it's soft and succulent, and we've got the glaze really well set. See how shiny it is? Oh man, this is the best part of doing ribs. Right, so this is called perfection. We've got a really well glazed rib, nice and succulent. Look at that. Look at the smoke ring. It is juicy. It is perfect. We've got a nice crust on it. Oh man, I just can't talk anymore. I need to do this. You see, it comes off clean on the bone, nice and soft. Beautiful. We've had some questions online about people saying, how do you sear black and blue, and what are the kind of things you can sear quickly and get it on the backyard barbecue? And yes, you can do beef fillet, black and blue. You can sear some salmon, some really nice fish, but we thought we're going to push the envelope a little more. Cowboy's going to lift it higher. We're going to put some class into our cooking program today. We're going to use Alberta pork fillets, sear it, then do a white wine mushroom cream reduction sauce and serve our pork fillets with that. It's really a very classic French dish when you do fillet in white sauce, but we thought we can show you how you can quickly put a meal together that is a cut above the rest. Bon appetit. Thank you for joining the Cowboys. We really appreciate you are sticking with us as we work our way through your questions. Please keep sending them, because that's the only way you learn. And keep cooking with local produce.